Welcome to the Daily Report on Wednesday, March 19th. I'm Lindsey Reiser. Extended deadline. A judge grants the Justice Department an extra 24 hours to respond to questions about recent deportations under a rarely used wartime act. Why the government is pushing back.
A rare rebuke from Chief Justice John Roberts after President Trump called for the impeachment of the judge in the latest case over deportation flights.
This judge does not have that authority. It is the opinion of this White House and of this administration.
We're at the point where the executive branch is starting to openly defy these judicial orders.
The Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged.
When you hear the Fed say no change, we can afford to be patient, I think this is that extra uncertainty around what's the tariff situation going to mean for the economy.
Both President Trump and President Putin agreed on the need for this conflict to end with a lasting peace.
The Kremlin put out a statement last night saying that Russia will only agree to a long-term ceasefire if all foreign military aid to Ukraine is stopped.
Trump and Zelensky discussed the possibility of a full ceasefire, and they agreed to send technical teams to Saudi Arabia next week to work on the details of a potential truce.
Hello and thank you for joining us. President Trump is doubling down on his criticisms of the judicial branch. Since the president took office, there have been several cases of federal judges temporarily stopping the administration from dismantling agencies or firing government employees. Plaintiffs, such as employee unions and nonprofits, have questioned the legality of these moves, many of which are still being argued in court. But the White House's legal battles went a step further over the weekend after the administration did not turn around flights to El Salvador carrying alleged gang members, despite a judge's verbal order to do so. The administration argues it did not break any laws because the judge didn't put his order demanding the planes to return to the U.S. in writing. And because the planes were already over international waters, where, according to the DOJ, the judge no longer had jurisdiction. The president says the judge in that case should be impeached. He wrote in a Truth Social post early Wednesday, quote, "If a president doesn't have the right to throw murderers and other criminals out of our country because a radical left lunatic judge wants to assume the role of president, then our country is in very big trouble and destined to fail." White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterated that view at Wednesday's briefing.
The judges in this country are acting erroneously. We have judges who are acting as partisan activists from the bench. They are trying to dictate policy from the President of the United States. They are trying to clearly slow walk this administration's agenda, and it's unacceptable.
We're closely following developments on the war in Ukraine as well. President Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky Wednesday, one day after speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez joins us now. Nancy, the White House, again, back to that issue of partisan judges. They say are partisan judges. The president also says the judge in the deportation case should be impeached. Is this mostly rhetoric, or do you get a sense this is part of a bigger fight brewing?
Well, President Trump has railed against judges who rule in ways that he doesn't want them to for years. In his personal cases that he has faced, in a lot of election cases that he has brought. So in a way, it's nothing new. But what is different here is that he is actively pushing for this particular judge, Judge Boasberg, to be impeached. And even though the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is a conservative, Justice John Roberts, has basically come out and said, hey, that's not the way to deal with a ruling by a judge that you don't like. You can always appeal it and take it up the chain. But President Trump is saying, I respect Justice Roberts, but I still think this judge, other activist judges, in his words, should be impeached. And we're just learning tonight that that Elon Musk, the head of Doge, a very close ally of this president, has actually donated to a handful of Republican lawmakers who support legislation to impeach judges like this one, who they believe are overreaching. The bottom line is the White House says that these judges are after Trump personally and that they have issued more injunctions against his moves than they have against any other president. But the reality is that President Trump is making more moves and using novel legal justification for those moves than any other president. And it's perhaps not surprising that he's facing more judicial pushback.
President Trump spoke with Zelensky, as we mentioned. What are we hearing from the White House about the call, and where do peace talks go from here?
They say that the call was a good one, that Trump and Zelensky are on the same page, that more talks, technical talks about how exactly they go from this partial ceasefire, where the two sides are agreeing not to strike the other side's infrastructure, to what they see as the next step, which is a ceasefire that applies to the Black Sea, and then a 30-day full ceasefire. They say that those talks are going to continue in Saudi Arabia. And interestingly, the White House made clear today that they are going to continue to share military intelligence and military aid with Ukraine a day after Russia made it clear that it would not support a ceasefire if the aid and the intelligence sharing, not only by the U.S., but by the rest of the world, weren't ceased as well.
All right, Nancy Cortez, thank you. The federal judge who ordered the administration to turn around those deportation flights to El Salvador is giving the administration another day to provide details on the flights. Judge James Boasberg granted the extension earlier Wednesday after Justice Department officials indicate they may claim state secrets privilege to keep the details private. CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now. Scott, can you explain what state secrets privilege is and why the government thinks it may apply here?
Yeah, the government's making the argument that releasing all the information the judges asked for could compromise their ability to combat terrorism and combat these drug cartels. But some of what they're arguing is immaterial to what the judge is saying here. The judge is saying, I've ordered you to do things, you're disregarding the orders. There's a proper way of disagreeing with orders. That's to appeal it, not to disobey the orders of the court. So that's a fundamental dispute that was to be ironed out by 12 p.m. Eastern time today. That was the deadline the judge set for the Department of Justice to answer his specific questions about how this all went down last weekend. The Department of Justice defied that order, didn't respond to the questions, asking instead for further postponements. The judge agreed to postpone it till tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. He wants the answers then. It's unclear if that information is going to be handed over, but Lindsey, you see where this is headed. This type of standoff and dispute between the administration and the courts is not just a potential constitutional crisis, but one retired judge told CBS News today it's the start of one.
I want you to pull on that thread a little bit further. But first, what have we heard from the judge in response to the government's arguments? And in terms of that fear of a constitutional crisis, I mean, right now, the evidence is suggesting that the executive branch is falling in line with what the judicial branch is saying, right? So these are more fears about what could possibly be to come if this rhetoric becomes something other than that.
Yeah, the judge in his order today, Lindsey, echoed what the Chief Justice of the United States said last night, that the proper system, the proper sequence of events, if you disagree with the judge's ruling, is to appeal it, not to disobey it. In fact, Justice Roberts last night said you can't just impeach a judge because you disagree with the judge, trying to reinstitute some norms here. But this has been shattering norms. And here are two things we can report as the evening begins here in Washington. An appeals court has set a Monday 1:30 p.m. Eastern time hearing on the Department of Justice's appeal of what the judge has ordered here. That is the proper sequence of affairs. But in the meantime, the judge still wants answers to what time the planes took off. When did they leave U.S. airspace? When did all of this happen vis-a-vis the actual landing of the flight in El Salvador Saturday evening? And as the evening began here in Washington, he did not get the answers, the timeline he ordered.
In a separate case, Scott, a judge ruled Tuesday that Elon Musk's efforts to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, is likely unconstitutional. President Trump says he'll appeal. Where does this leave the agency for now?
In a constant state of flux, seemingly, for the U.S. Agency for International Development. There have been twists and turns in this legal battle, and former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, speaking exclusively with CBS News tonight, says this is actually a national security concern. If you hollow out or make uncertain the road ahead for this agency, which helps with international relations and helping our partner countries across the world. But that notwithstanding, Lindsey, it's just one of 140 plus legal challenges filed against the Trump administration since January 20th. And you can see now why, Lindsey, this battle between judge and administration so critical, with the courts being such a firewall at this moment in time.
140 plus cases?
so far, with more coming each day.
Scott McFarland, thank you. As expected, the Federal Reserve has held interest rates steady. While the Fed indicated that cuts are likely later this year, Chair Jerome Powell said there's high uncertainty about the potential impact of President Trump's trade and economic policies. The central bank opted to keep its federal funds rate at its current range of 4.25% to 4.5%. Speaking after Wednesday's decision, Powell acknowledged recent Trump administration changes in several areas and how they could potentially affect monetary policy.
Looking ahead, the new administration is in the process of implementing significant policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. It is the net effect of these policy changes that will matter for the economy and for the path of monetary policy. While there have been recent developments in some of these areas, especially trade policy, uncertainty around the changes and their effects on the economic outlook is high.
CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins us now. Kelly, you were at that press conference Wednesday. You asked about consumer sentiment. Let's listen.
So consumer sentiment has dipped dramatically, but you say the economy and the hard data is still solid. What is your message to consumers that clearly disagree and don't feel that strength? Because the hard data they're looking at is their grocery bill.
Okay, so a couple things. The grocery bill is about past inflation, really. There was inflation in 21, 2, and 3, and prices went up. The current level, it's not the change in prices, it's they're unhappy, and they're not wrong to be unhappy that prices went up quite a bit, and they're paying a lot for those things. So I think that is the fundamental fact, and has been for a long time, a couple of years, why people are unhappy with the economy. It's not that the economy is not growing. It's not that inflation is really high. It's not that unemployment is high. It's none of those things. We have, 4.1% unemployment. We've got 2% growth, and it's a pretty good economy. But people are unhappy because of the price level, and we completely understand and accept that.
What did you make of his response?
Well, look, Lindsey, I mean, he is right that we aren't at the levels that we saw back in the summer of 2022 when inflation was above 9%. We're under 3% as of last week. But I think what is the reality is that that's not how the consumer thinks about things. They think about how much money do I have in my bank account? How much am I paying on the essentials? And their wages have not yet made up that gap with inflation being so high. So yes, he said, look, a lot of the frustration is because of past inflation, but that is what's feeding into consumer sentiment. Now, on top of this, you have the potential impact of tariffs, and that's making that uncertainty worse.
And so how big of an impact will these tariffs and economic uncertainty have on future interest rate decisions?
Well, that's the big question, right? And Chair Powell said uncertainty so many different times. What I think is interesting is he did acknowledge that the impact of these tariffs could make that target of getting to 2% further, that it's going to impact the long-term progress on inflation. But I also noticed in the economic projections, they are expecting still to get 2 interest rate cuts this year. Now, normally, if you were really worried about inflation, you would not cut interest rates because interest rates make it cheaper to borrow money and it encourages consumer spending. And so that's the other part of the equation, that you have potentially higher inflation with tariffs, but consumer sentiment that could cause a pullback in consumer spending and then lead to slower growth. So the Fed is really between a rock and a hard place. And that's why you heard a lot of let's wait and see how these different dynamics play out.
What was the stock market reaction to all this?
Well, stock market likes interest rate cuts. So it was actually very positive. We saw the Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P 500 all finish up significantly, 1% or more. And they like to hear, one, that you're going to get 2 interest rate cuts. As of now, that could always change. And also, Powell did suggest and outright stated that he does think the impact of these price increases from tariffs may be transitory or, in other words, short term. So that's why investors liked the read from Powell today.
Kelly O'Grady, thank you. A ruling against Greenpeace still to come. Why the environmental activist group now has to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. Plus, a federal judge orders a reversal on part of President Trump's efforts to shrink the federal government. We take a look at the rehiring spree inside agencies after thousands of workers were fired. You're watching The Daily Report. A federal judge has denied the Trump administration's bid to dismiss pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil's challenge to his arrest by immigration authorities. Judge Jesse Furman also ruled Khalil must remain in the U.S. for now and moved his case to New Jersey. This is because Khalil was being held in New Jersey when his lawyers first challenged his arrest. Even though he was arrested in New York, he's currently being held in Louisiana. Khalil, who is a permanent U.S. resident and green card holder, was instrumental in last year's pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University. The Trump administration is trying to deport him over this. 18 federal agencies are working to reinstate thousands of employees who were fired as part of President Trump's effort to reduce the size of the government. It follows a judge's ruling last week that temporarily blocked the firing, saying they were likely illegal. The Trump administration provided a detailed account of more than 24,000 workers who were affected to be in compliance with the judge's order. Most were probationary employees, meaning they typically held their roles for less than a year. Melissa Quinn is a politics reporter for CBSNews.com and has been following this for us. So, Melissa, how did CBS News uncover this information?
So this information came about through declarations that human resource officers across these 18 different agencies filed with the federal district court in Massachusetts to comply with that order that was issued last week, ordering these reinstatements. And this really represents the most comprehensive accounting that the public has seen so far of exactly how many of these probationary workers lost their jobs at the end of February and into March, and now, by the order of two different federal judges, are ordered to be rehired.
Which government agencies were affected the most?
Well, as you said, you're talking about more than 24,000 probationary workers in all. Sort of the biggest numbers here came from the Department of Treasury, where there were more than 7,000 probationary workers who lost their jobs and now have since been reinstated. That includes more than 6,000 at the IRS, as CBS News has reported before. There's more than 5,400 probationary workers who were affected at the USDA, more than 3,000 at the Department of Health and Human Services, and more than 1,000 at the Department of Veterans Affairs.
The Justice Department has already appealed attempts to block these firings. Do these legal rulings offer these employees protection in the future?
Well, they have that protection now, and the 18 agencies have said that all of these workers have received notices that they are being reinstated. But there is no guarantee, as you said, for the future. The Justice Department has appealed these decisions in one case from California to the Ninth Circuit, and in the case out of Maryland to the Fourth Circuit. And that concern about exactly the impact that this would have on these probationary workers was actually raised by these human resource officers in their declarations. They're saying that if there is an appellate court ruling that reverses these lower court decisions, that would really lead to chaos and confusion for these workers as to exactly what their status is within the federal government.
I'm sure there's already chaos and confusion. A judge also has denied a restraining order to block DOJ from taking over the U.S. Institute of Peace. What do we know about this?
Well, this is really quite an extraordinary turn of events that has played out over the past few days. Today, Judge Beryl Howell, who sits on the federal district court here in D.C., declined to issue a temporary restraining order, which would have blocked DOJ's alleged takeover of the Institute of Peace. This was in a lawsuit that was brought by 5 fired board members who have said that that action was unlawful. She had really harsh words, though, for the Trump administration and the Justice Department, saying that she was, quote, offended by how some of these workers and the director of the Institute of Peace were treated, and in particular took issue with the presence of law enforcement as some of these DOJ staff tried to gain access to the nonprofit organization earlier this week.
Melissa Quinn, please come back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Research and workforce cuts coming to the Environmental Protection Agency. We take a look at the history and legacy of the agency and what cuts could mean for the future of climate policy. You're watching The Daily Report. Welcome back to The Daily Report. I'm Lindsey Reiser. Here are some additions to our top stories. As egg prices soar due to bird flu in the U.S., border officials are cracking down on international egg smuggling. New data shows there were more than 3,200 egg-related seizures in January and February across both the northern and southern borders, a 116% increase from last year. However, U.S. officials told a Canadian news outlet most egg seizures happen after travelers admit they're carrying them. The Social Security Administration is imposing new rules at the end of the month to combat fraud. Beginning March 31st, people will no longer be able to verify their identity over the phone to the SSA. And those who can't verify through the agency's online service will have to visit a field office in person. This change comes despite the agency's plans to shut down dozens of offices nationwide. A preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board reveals what could be a significant factor in a fatal plane crash in western Alaska last month. The pilot and all 9 passengers were killed when the small plane went down. The report did not give an official cause, but investigators say the plane was more than 1,000 pounds overweight for the flight conditions at the time. Well, a new report is raising concerns about the warming planet, highlighting some key indicators of climate change that reached record highs last year. First are global temperatures. According to the World Meteorological Organization, 2024 was the hottest year on record, beating the previous record set in 2023. Temperatures averaged more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above what they were in the pre-industrial era. That crosses the global limit set under the Paris Climate Agreement. The report also found a continued rise in greenhouse gases, with carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide reaching their highest levels in 800,000 years. Gases like this trap heat in the atmosphere, which can fuel extreme weather events and ocean warming. A federal judge has blocked the Trump administration's attempt to cancel $14 billion in climate grants as part of its cost-cutting measures. And the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, is preparing to potentially lay off up to 75% of staff from one of its major research bodies. With major changes expected to hit the EPA, we wanted to take a look at how the agency came to be. In the 1960s, a series of environmental disasters made Americans realize how polluted the air and water were. In Ohio, 5-story flames burned on the Cuyahoga River after sparks from a train ignited oil-soaked debris floating in the water. 2 separate smog incidents in New York City blanketed the air with sulfur dioxide, killing hundreds of people. And an oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara coated hundreds of miles of beachfront with slime and killed hundreds of birds. In response, President Richard Nixon created the cabinet-level group, the Environmental Quality Council, to create a comprehensive government response plan. One of the group's recommendations was to create a government agency responsible for managing national environmental concerns. Nixon highlighted the importance of a federal response to the environmental crisis in his 1970 State of the Union.
Clean air, clean water, open spaces, these should once again be the birthright of every American. If we act now, they can be.
In the more than 50 years since Congress created the EPA, the agency's primary responsibilities have been to protect human health and the environment, and it accomplishes this by enforcing environmental laws passed by Congress, creating national air and water standards, and giving grants to state programs and nonprofits benefiting the environment. The agency's work has seen significant results. There's been a 78% drop in common air pollutants since the EPA's founding. 18 million acres of contaminated land have been cleaned up as of 2020. And there's been a 93% drop in the average lead concentration in children's blood. Jennifer Orme-Zavaleta joins us now. She's the former Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for the EPA Office of Research and Development under the first Trump administration. Thank you very much for being here. The EPA plans to cut 50 to 75% of its roughly 1,500 positions at the Office of Research and Development. What does this office do, and what impact would those cuts have?
Hi, thank you for having me. So as you noted, EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment. And it does that by implementing the environmental statutes that Congress passed. Those statutes call for EPA to conduct research, and it also calls for EPA to use the best available science. EPA's Office of Research and Development provides the science to inform agency decisions, and it also provides the science to help solve environmental problems, such as what you just described.
Well, the EPA is requesting that the required 60-day notice of termination for employees be reduced to a 30-day notice period. Is that worrisome?
Oh, it's very worrisome. I mean, if we look at all of the changes that are being suggested, I mean, these are people's lives that are going to be impacted by these kinds of changes, and particularly eliminating the Office of Research and Development and cutting up to 75% of the staff. You're going to be losing a wealth of scientific expertise that this country relies on. If there is an emergency, such as a train wreck, an oil spill, a hurricane, a mining accident, just to name a few, it's EPA's Office of Research and Development that helps to solve those problems, to provide the technology and the technical assistance to clean up those spills and address those issues to help the people that are exposed.
So, if that's not happening, and on top of last week's rollback of some 31 environmental policies, what are your long-term concerns for the planet with these changes?
It is very concerning. We do run the risk of backsliding. You highlighted some of the conditions of the environment from back in the 60s, and that took a long time to clean up. Yes, it would take some time to revert back to those conditions, but removing the kind of scientific expertise that we have and that we need, we do run the risk of backsliding, and those effects are not going to be immediate, but people's health will be at risk. The environment will be at risk.
Jennifer, do you feel like climate change has become a political football?
Absolutely. The disappointing thing is much of what the scientists at ORD and what EPA does should not be a political football. As you just described, there are a number of benefits that have been achieved over its 54-year history. These benefits impact not only the U.S., it benefits the entire world. The climate does not know geographic boundaries. And EPA, and particularly the Office of Research and Development, are worldwide leaders in the science that we do, and their impacts are very measurable and very real.
Jennifer Orme-Zavaleta, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Greenpeace now owes hundreds of millions of dollars in damages after a North Dakota jury found the global environmental nonprofit liable for defamation. CBS News national environmental correspondent David Schechter joins us now. David, what's the background of this case?
Good to see you. So really, this was, if you recall, back in 2016, 2017, there were these incredible protests of the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. A company called Energy Transfer was building a pipeline adjacent to the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. That drew thousands and thousands of protesters there, and at times it got quite heated. The demonstrations got a little violent. The protesters were sometimes handled in some pretty aggressive ways there. And that resulted in this lawsuit. That pipeline was eventually built, but this resulted in this lawsuit where Greenpeace is sued by Energy Transfer, the company that built the pipeline. And Energy Transfer said that Greenpeace essentially played a significant role in fomenting the unrest there, and that had a major impact on Energy Transfer's business. So this is almost a decade ago. This case has continued forward, and there's a lot of resentment between these two parties, resulting today in the $660 million verdict against Greenpeace.
Why is the verdict so consequential?
On a couple levels. I mean, financially, it is a huge blow to Greenpeace. First of all, they were at $340 million was what Energy Transfer was initially asking for. And it turned out to be $660 million awarded by this jury, or potentially even more. Greenpeace had said that kind of money is 10 times more than we even have in our operating budget. This will bankrupt us. We'll no longer be able to do our responsibilities here. And I think what they were saying is that this was a free speech lawsuit because of the scope of the money that they were asking for, that Energy Transfer knew that if they won, they'd basically be shutting down one of their big opponents and taking away their ability to have protests like these you're seeing right now.
Is that the future of Greenpeace, shutting down?
I think the future of Greenpeace right now is appealing this case in North Dakota. They were very concerned about the jurisdiction of where it was, and they felt it was not in their favor at all. So the next step for them is to appeal. Eventually, it does sound like from everything they said, they just do not have the funds to sustain this kind of damage against them, this claim against them. And so they say they would go out of business if this is something they had to pay.
David Schechter, thank you.
Thank you.
Several U.S. law enforcement agencies say they have stopped reselling their used guns following a joint CBS News investigation last year with nonprofit news organizations The Trace and Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. CBS News and The Trace, which is dedicated to covering gun violence in the U.S., say the police departments in Cincinnati and Columbus, Ohio, Sacramento, California, and Monmouth County, New Jersey Sheriff's Office have halted their used gun sales. 7 more law enforcement agencies across the U.S. said they would review their resale policies. Well, the initial investigation and data from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives revealed that more than 52,000 guns traced to law enforcement had been used in robberies, domestic violence incidents, homicides, and other crimes between 2006 and 2022. Last year, CBS News spoke to the mother of 19-year-old Cameron Brown, who was shot and killed in Indianapolis in 2021 with a gun previously owned by a sheriff's deputy in California.
You know, another family lost another child at the hands of a firearm that shouldn't even be on the streets. It shouldn't even be on the streets. There's no reason for police firearms to be in the hands of teenagers.
In response to our investigation, the Indianapolis Police Department immediately directed staff to stop selling department-issued guns. For more, let's bring in CBS News investigative data journalist Chris Hacker, who contributed to the investigation. Chris, as we mentioned, more than a dozen agencies tell CBS News they've either stopped selling their used guns or are changing policies because of this investigation. What specific factors prompted their reversals?
Yeah, so a lot of departments actually changed their policies because we brought this issue to their attention. They were previously unaware of it. We found it was very common for police departments to do this, to sell their used guns, and they often just are not informed if one of their old guns is used in a crime. But still others told us that they were reconsidering their policies because of a recent ATF report, which came out earlier this year and asked police departments to end this practice in order to reduce illegal firearms trafficking across the U.S.
Why do these agencies sell their guns in the first place? I mean, what are some alternatives for police departments that don't want to sell their guns?
Yeah, so departments sell their guns to get money to buy new guns. You know how you can trade in your used phone in exchange for credit towards a new one? It basically works the same way. And without this money, many departments told us that they just could not afford to keep their equipment up to date. The alternative, of course, is for those guns to be destroyed, but that costs money too, in addition to an already expensive firearms purchase. And so these departments just told us that they would need their city councils to approve additional taxpayer money to offset that lost revenue.
What might be the long-term public safety outcomes if law enforcement agencies continue reselling these used guns?
Yeah, very simply, these guns will likely continue to fall into the wrong hands and be used in crimes. In its report, the ATF said more than 1,000 homicides had been linked to former police guns from just 2019 to 2023. That's like 4 murders every single week. But, you know, the ATF can make recommendations, but it can't order departments to change their policies. These are decisions that are made at the local level, department by department. So without sweeping changes in departments across the U.S., this trend is unlikely to change anytime soon.
What is behind the correlation that these guns typically end up in the wrong hands?
So we don't know exactly how many even are ending up in the wrong hands, because once a police department sells it, you know, it's very difficult to trace. The ATF has the ability to track some of these guns. That's how we got a lot of the data for our story. But ultimately, a lot of the data that the ATF has is kept secret by federal law. And so we really have no way of knowing exactly the true scale of this.
Chris Hacker, thank you. Small American businesses are preparing for potential tariffs threatened by President Trump on wine and other alcoholic products from Europe. But is it all sour grapes? We speak with a New York production winemaker who says he sees some possible benefits to sip on for domestic businesses. You're watching The Daily Report. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said President Trump's reciprocal tariffs, or tariffs in response to another country's tariffs, are still expected to take effect on April 2nd. In an interview with Fox Business Tuesday, Bessent said the White House will provide trading partner countries with a specific number that takes into account their own rates, non-tariff trade barriers, and currency practices. The secretary added the Trump administration will then pursue negotiations with those countries. Well, you'll remember earlier this month, the president paused his 25% tariffs on a variety of goods covered by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, until April 2nd. An additional 10% tariff on Chinese products is currently in effect, as well as a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports. In response to those steel and aluminum tariffs, the European Union said last week it would place levies on $28 billion worth of American goods, including beef, poultry, bourbon, jeans, and peanut butter, starting April 1st. President Trump said if that tariff is not, quote, removed immediately, he will impose a 200% retaliatory tariff on all wines, champagnes, and other alcohol imported to the U.S. from France and other European countries. According to World Bank data, the U.S. is the top importer of wine in the world, bringing in nearly $5 billion worth of product in 2023. And the Department of Agriculture says the U.S. exported $167 million worth of wine and related products to the EU in 2024 alone. For more, let's bring in Andrew Rockwell. He is a production winemaker at Sparkling Point, a winery and vineyard located on New York's Long Island. So, Andrew, how might a potential 200% tariff on European wine and champagne affect restaurants and retailers in the U.S.?
It's going to cause them a lot of risk. It's a long-term proposition in our business. So people are buying wines years in advance, and not knowing what the cost is going to be coming in could cause them some pain and issues. And these are our partners, so we're concerned for them.
And you guys specialize in sparkling wine, right? And we say sparkling wine because it's produced outside of the Champagne region of France. Am I correct?
That's 100% correct, Lindsay. We make nothing but sparkling wine here at Sparkling Point on the east end of Long Island. Exclusively method champenois, we'll call it, or method traditionnel, where everything is fermented in the bottle. So in the same style you would see there with the similar grapes that we would grow in champagne.
And so President Trump said last week, quote, "This will be great for the wine and champagne business in the U.S." Will it?
That's hard to say. We can't really ever predict for sure. Are the tariffs going to be 200%? Are they going to be 25%? We hope this is at least a moment of discovery for people who love champagne, who are interested in sparkling wine, and don't really know much about domestic producers. Here on the east end of Long Island, in New York in general, we have a wonderful, cool climate. It allows us to great acidity, great finesse in our wines. So we hope this is a time when people can look and see what's right in their back door and see how wonderful these wines are and also how price competitive they are.
If the idea is to encourage more domestic production of sparkling wine, you know the cost, time, the effort that goes into changing production methods. Is that feasible for other winemakers?
In the long term, yes. But let's say you want to plant a new vineyard, for instance. It's going to take you at least 3 years to see any grapes. When we make our very particular sparkling wine, it's going to take as long as 3 years from when the grapes are picked to when we even see that bottle on the shelf. So you're talking about really maybe a 5 to 6 year proposition.
Wow.
Our most prestigious wines even age 8 years before we release them. So short-term tariffs, short-term political situations, it's really hard to move that needle for us in a short-term perspective.
I have about a minute left with you, but what are your overall concerns for your industry at a time when everything is coming in so fast and furious and there's so much uncertainty?
Our whole industry is small and it's really interconnected. We're all partners. We all try to work together. And if one of our partners is hurting, we all potentially feel it. We hope it increases interest in our wines. We hope people look to domestic sparklings. But if restaurants start going out of business, if distributors start going out of business, that affects everyone in our industry.
Well, Andrew Rockwell,
we hope that people will come.
Oh, please finish your thought.
So we hope people come and we hope that people will come to East End of Long Island, see all the wonderful wineries out here. And maybe they didn't even know we made wine in New York and didn't even think about domestic sparkling before. So hopefully we've got at least those things that people can think about.
Well, Andrew Rockwell, we appreciate your time and good luck to you.
All right. Thank you very much.
We've made it to the big dance. Up next, we're talking with the head coach of the men's team from High Point University, hoping for a real Cinderella story in this year's NCAA tournament. You're watching The Daily Report. The FBI is searching for a person who attacked a Tesla repair center in Las Vegas, setting multiple cars on fire. It's the latest in more than a dozen cases of arson and vandalism targeting Tesla. Instances Attorney General Pam Bondi is calling acts of domestic terrorism, which isn't an official federal charge. Andres Gutierrez is in Vegas with the latest.
This fiery scene outside a Las Vegas Tesla repair shop shows multiple vehicles set ablaze just before 3 a.m. Tuesday. The word resist was spray painted on the front of the building.
We believe the suspect approached the business wearing all black clothing, and he used what appeared to be Molotov cocktails and a firearm to conduct his attack.
Just hours earlier in Kansas City, 2 Tesla Cybertrucks were set on fire at a dealership. Elon Musk reacted last night on Fox News.
I think they're getting desperate because, the reason we're seeing this extreme amount of hatred and violence is because we're actually succeeding and getting rid of corruption and waste.
At least 15 reports of vandalism to Tesla vehicles and dealerships have been made in the U.S. this year.
I love Tesla.
While promoting Tesla last week, President Trump said vandals would be prosecuted as terrorists for targeting Musk's cars.
We're going to catch you, and you're going to go through hell.
It creates sympathy in a positive way for most folks.
Alexander Edwards is the president of automotive research and consulting firm Strategic Vision. He says while the vandalism might not hurt Tesla's brand, it needs a new strategy.
They absolutely can find some success coming out of this. But if you're going to aggressively attack those who were already in your camp and loved you, that's not a winning solution.
Andres Gutierrez, CBS News, Las Vegas.
The madness has finally arrived in the world of college basketball, March Madness, that is. The first rounds of the men's and women's NCAA tournament begin this week. One team looking to steal the spotlight this year is the High Point Panthers from North Carolina. They make their March Madness debut Thursday against Purdue. And joining us now is High Point's men's basketball head coach Alan Huss. Coach Huss led the team to a 29-5 record in the Big South Conference tournament to punch their ticket into the big dance. Coach, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
What does it mean for High Point to finally make a tournament after more than 25 years playing Division I basketball?
Well, I've only been here for 2 of the 25, but I can tell you this: for our fans, it's a great form of validation. I feel like they've been supporting us through thick, thin, everything in between. We've had some near misses. It's awesome for them to be able to see us play on a national stage and let the rest of the country in on our little secret we have in High Point, North Carolina, which is that we play great basketball in a great league, and we're excited for our moment.
And this is only your second year coaching in High Point. When you were hired, was this the goal, and did you think that this would happen so fast?
Yeah, I don't know if I had the luxury of dreaming or thinking much. It was mostly just attacking the day and trying to win short-sighted battles on a daily basis. When you take these jobs, there's so many different things moving at such a rapid pace. But absolutely, for all of us, especially in wet bid leagues, the ultimate goal is to play in the NCAA tournament and prove that we can belong on the highest possible level at the highest possible stage.
You've been to the big dance 3 times as a player too. So how does that factor into how you're coaching your players in such a big moment of their lives?
Well, I mean, that's just it. It's validation. I think it's for their hard work that it's all gone to something. It's so much fun for them. It's amongst the best memories of my life, certainly. Every time I've been here, whether it's as a player or a coach, it never gets old. It's so much fun. I'm thrilled for our group of young men that they get to experience it.
You are already part of the early conversations in the same sentence as Cinderella's story. Do you try and shut that noise out, or does it fuel you?
I mean, at this point, you're going to get everyone's best shot. So whether they call us a Cinderella or pick us for an upset, none of that really matters. At this point, it's about playing our best basketball and staying committed to the process that's got us this far.
Well, Coach Alan Huss, thank you. Good luck to you and the team.
Thanks so much for having me.
The women's NCAA tournament is just moments away from tipping off in South Bend, Indiana. It'll be Princeton taking on Iowa State in the 11th seed first 4 matchup. That will be followed by a 16 seed matchup between the Southern Jaguars and UC San Diego. The winners of those games will advance to the round of 64 and play again Friday. From there, it'll be down to 64 teams who are looking to advance to the national title game in Tampa, Florida on April 6th. Thanks for watching. CBS Evening News Plus begins after the break. You're watching CBS News 24/7.